and the ongoing protests against police violence. Activists are actually getting some wins in the campaign to defund the police. This time, the LAPD not going to be staffed to the levels that they have been in over a decade. We're going to get into the details of that. We're also going to talk about how COVID-19 not only impacting disproportionately Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, but how does it impact disabled people and the way that disabled people are either receiving care or not receiving care, and the way that disabled and elderly lives are deprioritized for COVID treatment. We're going to talk about a case coming out of Texas where a man who was a quadriplegic caught COVID and the doctors denied him care. They actually starved him for a number of days. We have some audio that his wife recorded that is making the rounds on social media. We'll get into that. But to start our discussion, we're going to talk about journalism. Journalists and how journalists in this moment are rethinking and making different choices about how to cover police murder and police brutality. In addition, we're seeing police be brutal towards members of the media. So many videos of cops attacking journalists blatantly, arresting journalists blatantly, simply for doing their job. So we have a great discussion in store for you. If you want to join us, you can always do that in the chat and in the comments. Shout out to all the people watching on Twitter via Periscope. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. And now it's time to introduce our panel. Our own visuals and research producer from The Real News, Andrew Corkery, is here. We're also joined with journalist Justine Barron, Justine, and political consultant Marcus Ferrell, regular here on Stir Crazy. Panel, thank y'all so much for being here. Happy eve of a day off tomorrow, because since 4th of July is canceled, it's just a day off, basically.
ACAB.
ACAB, I hear you, Marcus. Listen, speaking of all cops, all bad, let's start with the police, actually. A recent lawsuit filed by the ACLU against Portland police alleged that the police have been engaging in horrible tactics, not only against protesters, but against journalists as well, with the illegal use of tear gas and journalists being targeted for arrest, and also being shot at with different non-lethal projectiles by police while covering the protests. And I believe we have some video with a journalist wearing a press helmet who is actually being arrested. Let's take a look at that.
The person that you're arresting clearly is identified as press from his helmet. I am questioning you as to why you are arresting a member of the press. Why are you arresting a member of the press? Can you please answer me? Can you please state your name and why you are being arrested?
Move west.
So, gang, I know we have all seen these videos pretty much since the inception of the uprisings across the country, where journalists are just being, the cops are just going after members of the media. And it's just further proof about how our constitutional and civil rights are, I would say, under attack, but they may have already been eroded and we're just now catching up to it. Justine, as the journalist on this panel, let me start with you. What is your take about the way that the press is being treated by the police in what we've been seeing over the past several weeks?
I don't think this is new. I think it's just happening to mainstream journalists now, and it's happening more. But, being an independent journalist in Baltimore, I've received death threats, and I have colleagues and friends who have also had their tires slashed. A famous case, James MacArthur was a radio host and a journalist, independent in Baltimore. His house was raided. So this actually has been going on for a long time. The difference is that for the most part, these were independent journalists and activist journalists who've been targeted. So now that sort of the world is kind of rising up against police, now you have mainstream journalists being targeted. And also, of course, Trump has sort of opened that door. But it's not as if cops ever liked journalists. I think that the mistakes journalists have made up until maybe this moment is thinking that if they love the cops enough, the cops will love them back. And now we're seeing they're never going to love you back. Like, they have never liked you. They have just been manipulating mainstream media to promote pro-police stories. And now once you kind of suggest that you're on the other side, you see what police have always done to people that have spoken up against them.
Andrew, the scenes that we've been seeing are extremely reminiscent of similar scenes that have played out in other countries that do not enjoy a so-called free press. And we know that, countries like, Saudi Arabia and Russia, where journalists routinely show up not alive or injured in some way. This is something that we're used to pointing our finger and be like, no, that happens over there. Here we have the Bill of Rights, we have a constitution, and our police don't engage in these activities. Our media is free to report as they wish. And I know you've worked in lots of newsrooms, and just harkening back to what Justine talked about, there are some journalists who are really serious about maintaining a cozy relationship with police. But when journalists apply scrutiny, all that coziness kind of goes out the window.
Yeah, I think journalists just don't really apply the scrutiny, to the police to begin with. A lot of times, I mean, it's really kind of unfortunate. They look at police as a source, but they don't treat them as a source like you normally would. I mean, they treat them with a level of not having an ability to scrutinize that is not taken upon any other source that you would have. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing journalists actually start to question these sources more vigorously, like they should have been all along. And you're seeing some of these relationships kind of fall apart in real time. So, I mean, I think the problem is that people kind of take the cops' word as as the truth and treat it with little degree of skepticism at all, when in reality, police said is not really a shorthand for the truth. You're basically just, giving up your obligation to verify and corroborate whatever they're saying. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, I know there's lots of cases all over the world. For example, I'm working on a story right now for the Real News about Turkey and the increasing crackdown that's been going on in Turkey for a number of years on journalists. And what we're seeing play out in the United States is not unlike the beginnings of what happened in Turkey and other countries around the world, where you're seeing, basically this sort of loose but actually codified in some ways relationship between the press, the media, and the police and or the military. And you're seeing that crack. And once that starts to crack, people who are in authority, like Trump, like Erdogan in Turkey, and police union heads and people who run the police state, in America, basically, they're going to come back with a vengeance. And so what you're seeing that happen in real time with these videos taking place all the time.
Marcus, are we in danger of the idea, the principle of a free press completely going away in this country? Ever since the economic, recession that was caused by COVID hit in, we've seen journalists laid off by the hundreds across the country through a variety of different outlets, print, online, radio, broadcasts. Like, journalists are losing their jobs right now. So consequently, there are fewer eyes keeping an eye on the power institutions. Is journalism as we have come to know it, are we watching it take its final gasps of breath right now?
Possibly. And the reason I'm a little skeptical to say it's going to be over with, but I know a reason it's on the way out the door is because the tool that journalism was for white supremacy is starting to change. If you think about it, from the moment that Lee Atwater created the Southern Strategy, one of the strategies was to utilize journalism and utilize the imagery of newscasting in general, including journalists. If you think about most of the murders before Trayvon Martin that happened by police officers and African Americans in the country, you would always see the first thing a journalist would use is a mugshot and the backstory of the criminal history of a person that was just killed by the police department. So we have to understand the notions of what journalism used to be and what journalism is now. And I want to take it a step further. I want to give a shout out to the allies who are putting their bodies out there in the front lines now. because without the allies, there would be some journalists who wouldn't see someone like themselves, who has access to major papers and major outlets, who wouldn't see someone who looks like themselves out there getting beat up by the cops. Now, since it's someone that might look like themselves, they might be a little less skeptical to try to criminalize everybody who's just utilizing their First Amendment rights. So I kind of want to center race in this conversation again. Journalism has been unfair to African Americans throughout the history of the job itself. So, I mean, when allies are actually speaking up and stepping up to the plate, and then they have to write about it, and they're starting to change narrative slowly. Again, police officers are a part of a white supremacist system that is America, right? And as soon as journalists start saying a fair story and not a pro Blue Lives Matter story, but a pro this is what happened story, and I'm just going to try to do the truth, then they're going to get their ass whooped too.
That brings us to the next sort of offshoot of this discussion. Justine brought a piece to my attention that appeared in the Washington Post with the headline that says, journalists are re-examining their reliance on a longtime source, the police. And, as someone who has a journalism degree, I hearken back to my undergrad classes back at Temple University and in how we were trained. We were instructed that, police say what the police say is the official account that generally you should accept. And to challenge that narrative would mean a great undertaking on behalf of the journalist in order to find enough sources to confirm a contrary story. And, and that entails a lot of diligence and a lot of trust. And Justine, I know you have worked on stories exactly like this. And what was interesting about the piece is that, it focused on the recent murders of both Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and how the initial accounts coming from the police, firstly about Mr. Arbery, was how they hadn't initially named any suspects. They hadn't given a lot of details about the case. They hadn't even really said, were there any arrests, et cetera. And obviously, we come to find out later, it's because the two men who are charged with Ahmaud Arbery's death have deep connections to the police and to the local prosecutors there in Brunswick, Georgia. Same thing with George Floyd. Police initially said that he had been combative and resistant until the videos were released, and we saw that it was the complete opposite of that. So, Justine, how do journalists operate now in this moment? Because to question or to doubt the legitimacy of what police are saying is not necessarily against what you're taught as a journalist, but it does go against that in a way. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that we need to reschool journalists altogether. I feel like I've been having these conversations in Baltimore for a long time. And even just when I read that Post article, the Baltimore Sun had 2 or 3 police say in their headlines. And it's like, what? Have you learned nothing? Come on. And I think that I think that if I talk to those reporters, they don't know that there's another way. They have no idea. Okay, let's say there's a police shooting of somebody and they don't get any other information. I promise you the headline is in that story. Okay, they might say, well, police say this, police say that. They haven't released body camera footage yet. That's your headline. Police withhold body, ask them, when will we get it? Well, we can't promise you that we're gonna, that's it. That's your headline. Police withhold body camera. That's the headline, not what police said about this person. Because the fact is that the Baltimore Sun, which is the one that I study the most, which I think is really bad, has always consistently gotten it wrong. Keith Davis Jr., Freddie Gray, Sean Suter, they just repeat what the police say and then cut to a year or 5 years later, they were wrong. And it's when are you going to realize that your source is using you in bad faith? And it's really aggravating, but the headlines are there. The headlines are in what the police aren't telling you. The headlines are in whatever one witness says to contradict it. And the funny thing about that Washington Post article that really got to me was I was like, okay, this is good. The Washington Post, which has its own terrible track record of pro-official reporting, is saying, okay, we shouldn't do this anymore. But then if you read the article, they go get the other side and they get quotes from this guy who runs PERF, like the Police Executive Research Forum, and he's the go-to guy for like police establishment point of view. So I was like, wow, you all are almost there, but you can't stop yourself. Like, you're presenting this other point of view from the person who has the most invested in the media, continuing to be stenographers for the police. So yeah, I could do an hour on this subject. It's really annoying to me.
I think it comes back to that false sense of objectivity that journalists have, that they believe that they're entirely objective and they're not permeable to people using them in a way that is nefarious. And I think that is really misguided. And you have to realize you have to treat police information with the same level, if not more of a level of scrutiny than you treat other information, because they have a historical track record of lying. And so if you don't confront that in your reporting, in the headline, in the subhead, in the way that you characterize and contextualize information for the public, they're going to believe that this is the truth. And you are the conduit through which that information flows. So yes, you have to try to be objective, I guess, in that sense, but you can't let your objectivity blind you to the truth. So the truth is that we have a semi-militarized state here against people of color in this world, and particularly in America. And so if you don't address that in the contextualization of your journalism, then, it's null and void, and you can't keep allowing the police to use you in this way. And so, when we have investigations, into police brutality, into police issues, a lot of that comes to the surface, because what happens is you have journalists that are really focused on being objective, but at the same time, not recognizing that there are other angles to this story and to how to approach it. So I think that needs to be made clear in how people contextualize this information.
I would like to add that in the South, you need to also add the coroner's office to this conversation, right? Because the coroner's office in the South just consistently lies about how people died and what happened to brothers and sisters who get killed pretty consistently. And have you ever noticed, I think everybody in America smokes weed. I'm pretty sure everybody that's watching this smokes weed, right? But have you ever noticed that every time a black man dies, the first statement that's out of the, that's reported is marijuana was in the system? Who doesn't smoke weed? But it shows the place that journalism kind of has when it comes down to narrative creation, right? Like, so all of a sudden this guy smoked weed and he turned into a 800-pound bear that was able to flip cars over and stop bullets, right? That's because of a joint, some kind bud. So it's very interesting how they do that. But we need to watch out for the coroners, and we need to watch out for narratives and how they're built in general.
Same problem in Maryland. Sorry, I was just going to say we have the same problem in Maryland and California with the medical examiners. So that's just a national issue.
No, I wanted to direct our viewers to go to our YouTube page under videos, under the tab of police accountability reports. Taya Graham and Stephen Janis have reported on that exact thing, Marcus, about how the way medical examiners and coroners report these homicides, undetermined cause, or the individual had all these underlying conditions. No, if he didn't have a fucking knee on his neck, he'd still be alive. Is the bottom line about it. But I wanted to circle back because, guys, the larger collective of America, mainstream America, has been conditioned with this trope of officer friendly, and how it's not even a good idea to even question the cops. Or if you do question cops, they get offended as if, why would I ever lie? Motherfucker, you lie all the time. Like, we know this. And, Black America, referencing back to what Marcus says, has a tendency to look at the police very soberly, because we know the narrative will easily be, sprinkle some crack and let's get out of here, Johnson. So, how do we shift away from giving this societal, just unconditional, implicit trust to the police? Sentiments that we see largely coming out of conservative America, back the blue and Blue Lives Matter, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how can we prove to them that the cops lie so they can take some of these allegations as seriously as the rest of us, that these people are not upholding the oaths that they have sworn in the interest of public safety, Marcus?
Well, first, people who do crack don't leave sprinkles.
Shut up, Marcus.
I'm just saying they don't leave sprinkles. Second, we have to push the truth about what happens a lot more. We have to publicly humiliate the coroner's office that initially comes out with bad information. We have to actually publicize, the initial reports that the cops turn in, right? And juxtapose that to what the actual fact is, and actually have campaigns behind that. It's going to be really tough for the suburb of America who, either that cop lives in or who that cop protects in a very nice way and climbs up trees and gets fucking cats out of trees and, does all that good old stuff for those neighborhoods. It's going to be hard for them. And that's why it takes a proper amount of leadership. I don't think white America is going to ever look at the police department in a negative way overall. I just don't think that, because it's been so embedded in American culture that people of color, Black and indigenous folks, are organically the enemy, and that they're beasting and wilding in the streets. And and even when we are, peacefully protesting, most of white America and Fox News gets their violent. They're violent this and they're violent that, and they're coming to break into your home. I mean, we had two white folks pop out their $1 million mansion with a gun and a pistol, acting like they were on, Grand Theft Auto. So I'll be very surprised if white America actually changes that. And that's why it's going to be on elected officials to actually just force them to change.
Andrew and Justine, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Andrew, but I'm thinking of an interesting sort of divergence that we've been seeing here in the age of Trump, right? Where Trump will wholesale shit on the FBI and the CIA and lying James Comey, and he's a dirty cop and he's this, that, and the third. But at the same time, will take the position of, standing by and behind, murderous, abusive police and police forces. Where is that disconnect coming from white America?
Well, I think it's a large disconnect having to do with just internal conservative identity politics to a large extent. But I also think it stems from, the fact that, white people generally, because of how segregated our society still is, don't actually interact with people of color to the varying degree that they need to in order to kind of see the reality of what people of color are living in America every day. And so as long as we're physically separated, even if we have our own echo chambers online and so forth, you're not going to tangibly live that experience of someone of color, unless you kind of go out of your way to talk to people about their experience and understand the trauma that they live through. So I think that there are a lot of problems with white America not addressing, what's going on here. But I do think that the trend is kind of going up in terms of people are coming to the conclusion that this aggression will not stand, as we talk about in The Big Lebowski and stuff like that. If you guys have ever seen that movie, but people are coming to that conclusion because, if you look at this New York Times article that just came out, the New York Times polling that shows the level of support for Black Lives Matter has just skyrocketed since the murder of George Floyd. It eclipsed where it was, years ago and went up tenfold in a matter of weeks. So I do think that there are some positive developments, although I do think that the main problem is that the power structure in American society is still largely controlled by the white, ruling class and neoliberal elite inside of society. So, the public opinion could be one thing, but the people controlling the situation and, passing the budgets for the police officers and, making the laws and in the legislatures and so forth, that's a different class of people. And we've seen time and time again that the connection between what people want their legislators to do and what they actually do is such a gaping divide that we're going to have to bridge that divide as well, too.
Justine, I'll let you get the last bite at this apple.
Well, all this got me thinking about something, which is the true crime, like the interest in the true crime and the trend that happened. Okay. So back in the day, people liked these true crime novels about like the milk carton missing woman, right? So that was popular. That's what white people like to read. And then Serial happened. And since then, there's just been a big interest in wrongful convictions and like releasing these people from prison that are wrongfully convicted, right? And so there was like an article in the Baltimore Sun last week that kind of made the rounds, and this guy's probably going to get a Pulitzer or whatever, and it's about this guy that was in prison wrongfully convicted and had COVID and died. Okay, so people are broken up about that, but nothing is changing every day in terms of wrongful arrests and convictions. They are happening all the time. I know, like I'm seeing it happen in Baltimore in the state's attorney's office, wrongfully arresting and charging somebody. And so I think that when you talk about like, what's it going to take for people to finally, people seem to understand now, like white suburban people, okay, there were some bad police officers that do bad things here and there, and we have to free those people. They don't understand that it's like literally every day, that like the large majority of probable cause statements that I've ever read looked like bullshit to me. And that degree where they stop sort of fetishizing individual stories about bad police and really realize that the whole institution is seriously fucked, very fascist, incredibly damaging. I don't know when that's going to happen or if. I know too many white liberals that I somehow mistakenly friended on Facebook years ago. And like their takes on things are so irritating because it's always like, well, protest, but don't riot. And it's like, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think that white liberal America views wrongful convictions and wrongful, what the reporters mistakenly refer to as police-involved shootings, which is actually just a cop shot a fucking person. You know what I mean? Like, we need to get that straight too. But I think the problem is that, there is this disconnect in how white America sees everything. And so until we solve that, I don't know how we approach these broader policy issues,
I'm debating on whether or not to move on to the next story or ask Justine a question, because you've been tweeting about a story on your Twitter account, Justine, about an incident that happened recently in Baltimore City. This may have happened either yesterday or the day before, where police were responding to a home where apparently someone was having some sort of mental crisis, and the police ended up shooting this person in their house. And the way the Sun, took their take on it, exactly what Andrew just said, police involved shooting. No, the cop actually fucking shot somebody. Can you just brief us really quick about what's happening with that story and the issues that you've been seeing with the information coming from the Baltimore police and how it's been reported in local media?
I know the story. I haven't had the time to study every article about it. So I feel like there are other articles that I could speak to better. But yes, I mean, the problem here is that they shot a mentally ill person. One thing I know for sure is that there's a group of people doing dispatch reporting. They're listening to the dispatch and they're reporting on it on Twitter. And they said that the dispatch discussions about this person were that he was not armed. There was no discussion about him being armed. And so this is like one tool that we have is dispatch. Another tool is what video we can get from the police. And another tool is eyewitnesses, which our local reporters don't even think exist. Like they don't talk to them. They don't believe them. And so this is a case where like, okay, the police shot someone who's mentally ill and the commissioner came out with this theory about him being armed. And right away, we need skepticism around that. And that is so far from what I saw in the news, we're not seeing that, And then I think the related discussion is that they're sort of talking about moving to a different model of sort of social workers. But the thing is, I mean, I have a lot of questions about that, but most social workers work for the state. And if somebody has a gun or seems violent, they're just going to call the police. Like, I don't know if that's really a solution. I mean, that's taking you a little bit off topic, but it was sort of my thoughts about that particular case,
Okay. Well, Andrew, you want to make a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick that I think that there is a lot of nefarious stuff going on in the world of journalism, but I also think that a lot of this has to do with the way in which journalism is structured, in that, reporters and journalists need to put out stories immediately. And there's this insatiable hunger for content about all of this information constantly. And so one of the biases of media and journalism is really just sensationalism and laziness. And so if they can get a story out that's going to get clicks, it's going to generate revenue for, their newspaper business and what have you, they'll do so even if it only has the cops as a source. And yes, it's inherently racist to do that, but there are economic and political motives at play that enable the journalists to report that information in such a way. So I think that the problem is that journalism has become a market-driven industry in which you're trying to be the first to get on everything and not really get the truth. For example, in that same Washington Post article that we talked about, there was a reporter who worked at the Miami Herald back in 2003, and they said that when a cop would come up with a story about how their police-involved shooting occurred, they would have to send a young reporter down to the police station to get all of the documents on that police officer that was involved in that cop shooting, and then to verify and vet that police officer individually before they would report on it. Now they don't have the resources to do that. The newsrooms are cut, they have less reporters, and so now it's just get the story out as quickly as possible, even if you only get the police source. So that's another factor I think we need to kind of contextualize and bring some light to that affects the way that we frame Black lives in America.
Well said, Andrew. Guys, we have lots of comments from the comments. Red says, journalism profession was murdered in 1996. Bill Clinton's Telecommunications Act allowing corporate media to monopolize. You are 100% right about that, Red. I remember that like it was yesterday. It was the dark days for the news industry. David Gregory says, if they were a terrorist organization doing what cops do, imagine the reaction. And Marcus, we got a lot of responses to what you said about how everybody smokes weed. Al Gresniak says that he is smoking right now. Paul X BSOG says I smoke. Who else? Paul X BSOG says big facts. Syndicat said, yup. And Schultze 100 said, yup, I'm stoned. LOL. So we've got some hazy viewers watching us right now on Stir Crazy. Guys, obviously we've been right. I can't be stoned and do this, unfortunately. I will be getting stoned immediately after this. So yeah, laissez le bon temps rouler. So moving on to the issue of defunding the police, that has been one of the many demands by a lot of the protests that have been happening across the country and in Los Angeles. It seems as though the beginning steps to that have actually happened. On Wednesday, the LA City Council voted, I think the vote was 12-2, to take the Los Angeles Police Department down to 9,757 officers by next summer. That is a level of staffing not seen in the city since 2008. That's according to the Los Angeles Times. So in total, the council's move will cut $150 million to the LAPD budget, most of it coming from funds earmarked for police overtime pay. Gang, I wanted to get your thoughts and your take on that. We know that the LA Police Department budget, I think, is in the billions, but $150 million isn't much to sneeze at, Marcus. I mean, that is a victory. I think the activists out there should be pretty proud.
Yeah, we should. And we also have to make sure that we say that own our own narrative again and actually have activists / journalists elevate this victory as a victory for #defund the police, right? Like, that's it. There's not a moderate way to freedom here. And there's not a moderate, let's reform the police. I want to bring up something. When we had a Democratic House, when we had a Democratic Senate, when we had a Democrat for president all at one time, nobody lifted a freaking finger to reform the police, much less defund them. So we had to take to the streets. And when we took to the streets and the message was defund the police, the activists are actually going toe to toe with police departments all over the nation, and city councils across the country are not dealing with DNC talking points. City councils across the country aren't dealing with the Joe Biden campaign talking points. City council across the country has to deal with the local people who are fucking with their police. So the victories. So first, it shows just how out of touch the DNC can be at points, just how out of touch the Biden campaign can be at points by saying they want to give a couple $100 million to police departments across the nation. But then the activists who are battling police and city councils who are actively watching this are like, well, we got to do something or we won't be able to get reelected and our city might shut down. And Lord, I just want to drive home and get home by 5 o'clock without some protest diverting my way home. So we are winning. Though the people who need to take advantage of the talking points that are free, that are given to them for free from the streets, aren't doing that. And we wonder why we lose elections.
Yeah, I think that the Democrats just view their sort of white pseudo-conservative base in such a higher framework than they view the people out on the streets. And it's really unfortunate that they do that, because the people out on the streets are incredibly mobilized about politically what they want to achieve in their objectives, as were the people that are, sitting at home, watching TV, complaining about having to wear a mask and that sort of a thing, white suburban people. They're not politically driven by anything other than sustaining the current reality and or privilege that they already have. So I think that they're missing out on a huge opportunity to kind of galvanize and change things in a progressive, tangible way. But they're not going to do that because that's not their worldview. That's not their ideology. Joe Biden is the same person that said, well, how about instead of just shooting them, you could just shoot them in the leg? You know what I mean? Which is like the codification of like his ideology more generally. I mean, that's basically what it is versus Trump, who's going to shoot you in the face.
I think
am I wrong or no?
Oh, no, you're right. You're right, Andrew.
I mean, you're going to die either way because nobody's going to get you if you're lying there with your leg bleeding out. So, but
exactly.
The most aggravating part for me about the defund conversation was, I'm sure all of you saw this, but when it first started and everyone was saying, let's defund the police, finally we can be heard about this, there was this reaction from the center and from liberals and Biden, but a lot of them didn't say, let's not defund. A lot of them said, what do you mean defund? You can't actually mean defund. Don't you mean, isn't that language going to alienate voters? They were so reactive to that. And then they were doing this bad faith argument where they were playing dumb. I don't understand defund. As if there could not be a more clear combination vocabulary, D and fund, ever. But and there's so many articles about how education has been defunded for the last 10 years. And none of them ever said, defund, is this a new magic word I don't follow? And so that kind of bad faith arguing, it happened a lot with the Bernie campaign too, where it's how could we proceed with this candidate unless we see his cardiograph, just this stupid bad faith arguing is so aggravating. And I think we're kind of past it now that defunding is actually happening and people are oh, you meant less money. What sorry.
No, I think that's right. I think the funniest neoliberal, I call it the you guys take, come on, we want to defund the police, but don't scare all the white people, right? That's basically coming from, people like Bill Maher. If you saw his segment where he did a new rules segment and he basically just said, okay, guys, I basically believe with defunding the police, they're terrible, but let's not scare all the white people. That's the whole take. And it's a morally bankrupt way to present an argument, because you're saying that you agree with the message and the intangible nature of the movement, but you're denying them political agency within the movement to actually codify a language to discuss and bring about that policy change. So it's it's ridiculous.
The sort of parental we know better thought process from these moderates is just so sickening. Out of one side of their mouth, they'll say Black Lives Matter, but, our voices damn sure don't matter, right? Now, here's the interesting part. It's white people who are saying this shit. It's not just Black people. It's a lot of white kids who are defund the police, right? More than just bad faith. It is a power and a control thing that moderate Democrats have to have control over all narratives So whether it's let's give health care to everybody, but let's not call it Medicare for all. Let's send everyone to college, but let's not make it college for all. Let's take money away from the police, but let's not defund the police. It is a control thing just so they can have a certain amount of power over anything that looks progressive. They don't fundamentally, if it seems progressive, then they're against it because they still have to basically, and to be honest with you, if there wasn't so many corporate donors pulling out of Facebook and running commercials saying Black Lives Matter and the NBA and the NFL actually backtracking on their stance on taking a knee and protesting, moderate Democrats wouldn't even be fighting for this right now. They would literally be trying to change the topic to Donald Trump's taxes again, right? They literally be trying to change the topic to anything else besides, well, do we really have to deal with the black people? Because we don't know how to deal with the black people, and the black people scares the Karen in the Midwest who we need to vote for us.
I want us to take a pause real quick, guys, because I want to take us to a video that's funny and also not funny at the same time. Clay County, Florida, their sheriff, his name is Daryl Davies, I think. Hold on, let me look it up. I just had it. Daryl Daniels, Clay County Sheriff Daryl Daniels. Daryl Daniels is fed the fuck up. He is sick of all this Black Lives Matter shit. He is tired of seeing these protests all up and down and through his county. And he and his sheriff's department published a video to their YouTube channel this week that has been getting some attention. And listen, I had to watch the whole video, so y'all don't have to, but let me just bring you up to speed to the point where we're about to start this video. Sheriff Daniels has been saying about how him and the good men and women standing around him at this podium have been serving their community. They took an oath, pledged to uphold the Constitution, and they swore to God to execute their duties. So this is where we left off. He just swore to God about upholding his duties. Let's start the video.
And we end that with, so help me God. But God is absent from the media's message or Black Lives Matter or any other group out there that's making themselves a spectacle, disrupting what we know to be our quality of life in this country. In Clay County, we have a great quality of life. We have a great relationship with our community. But across this country, not so much. I just wanted to take a stand with these men and with these women who feel the same way that I do. Lawlessness, that's unacceptable in this country. Lawlessness, that's unacceptable in Clay County. And if you threaten to come to Clay County and think that for 1 second that we'll bend our backs for you, you're sadly mistaken. I know what happens when lawlessness prevails. And in this day and time, God is raising up men and women, just like the folks you see standing behind me, who will have strong backbones and will stand in the gap between lawlessness and the good citizenry that we're sworn to protect and serve. So you can threaten all you want. You can say, hey, let's go to Clay County, or let's go to some other peaceful county where their problems don't exist, or not so much like across this country, where relationships are great and not strained, and where the people support their sheriff and support the men and women who wear the uniform. And you'll have something waiting on you that you don't want. Yes, we'll protect your constitutional rights as long as you remain under the umbrella of peaceful protest or peaceful march. But the second that you step out from up under the protection of the Constitution, we'll be waiting on you. And we'll give you everything you want. All the publicity, all the pain, all the glamour and glory for all that 5 minutes will give you. Is it a threat? Absolutely not. But somebody has to step up in front of the camera and say, enough is enough. Tearing up Clay County, that's not going to be acceptable. And if we can't handle you, you know what I'll do? I'll exercise the power and authority as the sheriff, and I'll make special deputies of every lawful gun owner in this county. And I'll deputize them for this one purpose, to stand in the gap between lawlessness and civility. That's what we're sworn to do, and that's what we're gonna do.
What? Deputize?
Was that produced by The Onion? Was that produced by The Onion?
Hey, listen, first, Don't nobody want to come to your stank ass county and protest. We don't even want to show up to your little stank ass Clay County, boy. Second, boy, I would call him a boy because he probably watched this and not like boy. Second, this is very important. I want to respond to this guy right here. This guy is Steven from Django if he had a police department. This guy is pandering to a base unnecessarily when honestly there's no major disruptions planned. That was the most unnecessary video to record in the history of policing. He wanted to take a moment and basically scare the hell out of people who nobody wants to go to Clay County. Clay County is on the outskirts of Jacksonville. I used to live in Jacksonville. Most people don't want to go to Jacksonville. And it's the outskirts of Jacksonville. And you think we're going to go there and try to protest your ass? Nobody want to protest in Clay County. Like the only thing we want to protest is like, how did you get the job? That's the most ridiculous. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take...
No, y'all good. Listen, but y'all caught the end, right? So the hook was, if you come to Clay County and tear shit up, he's going to deputize legal gun owners to what? Keep the peace? I'm so confused. There's so much in confusion about what we just saw, Andrew. Hop in here.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be deputizing what will be a lot of right-wing militias that have no understanding of anything of what this movement is about and see it as an ideological threat, to the existence of white supremacy. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. And him making that video is further legitimizing those right-wing forces who are already ready for a fight. I mean, we've already seen this happen all across the country, with all these armed militias guarding statues and things of that nature. In Philly, they had all these armed right-wing vigilantes who were guarding a Christopher Columbus statue. They ended up sharing food with the cops. They were having pizza and hoagies together or whatever. I mean, you can see clearly who their ideological counterpart is, and that is the dangerous part. That's when it starts to get out of hand, is because not only do you have a state apparatus that's committed to enforcing white supremacy, you have vigilantes who are then, quote unquote, deputized in order to bring back law and order, which is basically, one man's law and order is another man's chaos and destruction and white supremacy. And, this is ridiculous. I mean, this video looks like it was produced by The Onion or Tarantino as like a stunt for his next movie or something. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's
Justine. How is it that I can look at this video and find it simultaneously hilarious and horrifying at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, most police PR I find really embarrassing. Like it's like excruciatingly embarrassing because they don't understand the audience at all. One thing that struck me is that I didn't see any women in the video. And so I guess either the sheriff's department is highly underrepresented, or more likely the women are put in specific kinds of police roles or not participating in this video. And honestly, and there's also a lot of square heads. I think like when you see cops with square heads, I've been studying the phrenology of cops, and a lot of them have square heads, which is sometimes a sign of steroid use, but I wouldn't want to like presume. I'm just saying sometimes. But I think if you notice in the protests too, it's usually mostly the crazy cops out on the street going nuts are white men. And it has a lot to do with how women on forces are engaged and used and kept out of certain kinds of squads that are now being activated. And I think part of what's so embarrassing for me is just to see police try to imagine themselves to be an army. And they've been given all this military equipment, but
you see it in the background?
Sorry?
You saw the military equipment in the background?
Yeah. I mean, it's tanks. That happened under Clinton, right? All the tanks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It
definitely continued under Obama too, I'm sure, and definitely under Trump.
Yeah, he militarized it more. It's just like, and the war that they're fighting is literally against, peaceful ideology and drugs, which they all probably use, just from the square heads. So I'm not like an expert on heads, it's just my perception. I've been studying this a lot.
I trust your observations there, Justine. Guys, the last topic I want to move along to is actually kind of serious, because obviously we are still dealing with a global pandemic, and the United States is not handling COVID-19 well at all. In a number of states, infections are on the increase, not on the decrease, especially in some larger places like California, Florida, Arizona, and Texas, where Texas continues to see record number of positive tests and hospitalizations each day. Florida's numbers are ridiculous. Like, the state is on fire. It's crazy. And obviously, there's a big debate about mask wearing, et cetera. And I think I wanted us to get a little bit into that part of the conversation, but I wanted to raise the issue of disabled lives and the way that they aren't being treated, disabled people who come down with COVID. And the story about Michael Hickson, he was a married father of 5. In 2017, he suffered a brain injury and was a quadriplegic, and he had been living at a nursing home in Texas since that time. Well, while living in the nursing home, he contracted COVID-19 and he was admitted to the hospital. Mr. Hickson died because doctors at the hospital judged, because he had a brain injury and was a quadriplegic, that he did not have a quality of life. So subsequently, they denied him hydration, nutrition, and treatment based off a quality of life decision. Now, Mr. Hickson's wife actually recorded part of her conversation with one of the doctors, where they basically told her that because her husband was disabled, there was no point in continuing to treat him for COVID. They weren't interested in getting him better off of this. So just a heads up, the video has subtitles. So if you're watching at home, you probably want to read the text that is on the screen. Let's take a listen.
At this point, with the decision is, do we want to be extremely aggressive with his care, or do we feel like this will be futile? And the big question of futility is one that we always question. And the issue is, will this help him improve his quality of life? Will this help him improve anything? And will it ultimately change the outcome? And the thought is, the answer is no to all of those.
But what would make you say no to all of those?
Because as of right now, his quality of life, he doesn't have much of one.
What do you mean?
So
because he's paralyzed with a brain injury, he doesn't have a quality of life.
Correct.
Who gets to make that decision whether somebody's quality of life, if they have a disability,
well, it's definitely not me.
Their quality of life is not good.
So it's not me. I don't make that decision. However, it's will it affect his quality? Will it improve his quality of life? No, the answer is no.
But why wouldn't it? Being able to live isn't improving your quality of life?
There's no improvement with being intubated with a bunch of lines and tubes in your body and being on a ventilator for more than 2 weeks. Each of our people here have COVID and they're in respiratory failure. They've been here for more than 2 weeks.
So they basically are
If I were to be frank, yes.
So if somebody doesn't die, are you going to think that was just
so
a chance?
I can count with one hand. There's 3 patients that have made it through.
But you can count 3.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Exactly. And I get your point. Like there are 3. However, he doesn't fit those 3. Those 3 are young people that don't have medical problems. This guy is young, but he has a number of medical problems.
So just so you know, my uncle is 90 years old.
Right.
He had COVID.
Right.
He has a bunch of medical problems. He has cancer.
Well, I would consider that a blessing, and every minute that he's still alive, a blessing.
Which is why to me you can't say that though, because
right.
all the directions pointed to him as being a risk that he would make it, and he did. And I just had another relative of mine pass away who was younger than him.
Well, I'm going to go with the data. I don't go with stories, because stories don't help me. Okay?
You know, panel, stories like this has sent a chill through the disabled community. So many disabled people and disabled activists have said that they fear exactly this, that because they have either a chronic condition or some sort of chronic injury, that their lives will be rendered to less than. And to even go a step further, let's pop up that tweet from the Arizona state government. Actually, the tweet was from a disabled activist, but they brought to everyone's attention that the state of Arizona is going to start assessing a ranking score about who can receive ventilators, who can be intubated, depending on whether or not they are elderly, whether or not they are disabled. And, this is terrifying. I mean, there are committees of bureaucrats who are using a ranking system, a scoring system to determine basically who lives and who dies in this moment during a global pandemic. And guys, if we are talking about the dystopia, welcome to this moment, because it has arrived. Justine, I want to start with you because, disabled people have a hard enough time in life in general, overcoming a lot of stigma, a lot of societal challenges, a lot of stereotypes. And now to think that if you have some sort of chronic condition or some sort of injury, if you're a quadriplegic, if anything, that someone else is looking at your life and determining that it is not worth living.
Yeah, that was really hard to watch. I've been trying to avoid watching that. I became disabled in 2010 and I don't present as disabled. I certainly don't recommend becoming disabled. It's really hard. And not so much the physical challenges as the ableism socially. Like, when are we going to have disabled lives matter? But, this is like pretty much expected. I find if I were to rank groups by how ableist they are, I would put doctors pretty high. My experience has definitely been that if I sort of don't get cured in certain ways that they expect from the majority of their patients, they sort of begin to consider me and others as not having a quality of life worth living. And quality of life can be greatly diminished, but to me, the disabled activists in my journey that I've encountered and the writers, Alice Wong is a great one. She said, we are the oracles of the future, because under COVID, a lot of people are going to become disabled by chronic long-term conditions as a result of this infection. And so we need to be paying attention to disabled people. Disabled people, I could give you lessons now on how to survive in quarantine, on how to survive when so much of your life gets taken away from you, how to deal with severe pain. Like, people need to be listening to us and upholding us. And there are other cultures in the world where the disabled people are treated as such, and the elderly. And so it's not surprising for me to see that. It is an extreme version of conversations I've had about myself and my mother when she was sick. It's just very hard. And I feel like most of those annoying white liberals on Facebook that I've communicated with, they are so far from understanding issues around ableism. They are starting to get racism. They definitely understand sexism, and they have no clue. So people should pay attention, because disability is going to happen to you most likely at some point, and it's good to be prepared.
100%. Like, I view this in the same way. It's almost like police brutality, right? A lot of America ignored police brutality until it perhaps happened to them or to someone that they, thought highly of. And if you ignore a problem because it's happening to others, well, there is going to come a point in time where it could happen to you very well. And Marcus, I mean, this gentleman was Black. I mean, that should not come as a surprise to anybody. I mean, obviously, you could insert any race of person in here, but it's not surprising that this was done to a Black person in this set of circumstances. What is your take about how just in society, how we value or devalue disabled lives? But at the same time, some people in the comments are saying that the reason why this person was denied treatment is because the healthcare industry could no longer make money off of them.
The capitalism capitalizes off of ableism. Let's be very honest. Like, it costs money to make an equitable society, whether it's sidewalks, whether it's proper elevators, whether it's just access to the first, second, third floor.